Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving into, well, one of the most polarizing and complex topics out there. Immigration. You hear so many passionate arguments, right? Strong opinions and often conflicting information. Our mission today is really to try and cut through some of that noise
Yeah.
and give you a clear understanding of a prominent conservative viewpoint on immigration, particularly focusing on the role states can play. We'll be drawing from various sources, policy foundations, legal analyses, even what's been called a red state manifesto, just to understand the core arguments and, well, the proposed solutions.
That's a really crucial mission, yeah, because what we found looking through the source material is how often the public debate just fixates on federal action. It really does. But this conservative perspective we're exploring today, it highlights the significant and sometimes, overlooked powers that states have, powers in shaping immigration policy within their borders. And this raises a really important question for you to think about. Can individual states truly lead the way where federal action is perceived by some to be falling short?
So let's start there, with understanding a fundamental distinction that really shapes much of this conservative stance. It's framed not so much as being anti-immigration in a broad sense. Rather, it's a strong opposition to illegal immigration. The core argument here, as we found it, is that individuals who enter the country without following the established legal processes, well, they're seen as disrespecting national laws and circumventing a system that many others adhere to, often at great personal cost. The sources we looked at, they highlight this deep frustration. For instance, comparing someone who's gone through the lengthy, often tough legal process like a U.S. citizen spouse, maybe separated for over a year, waiting field. Contrasting that with a perception that others simply, walk in.
Right. And from that specific perspective, the federal government is consistently seen as having failed in its primary duty to enforce immigration law and secure the border. This failure, the argument goes, jeopardizes national sovereignty and national security. Our sources point to specific instances like claims that the Biden administration eliminated nearly 90 previously successful border policies, and also a perceived shift in resources away from arresting and deporting individuals towards simply processing new arrivals. And you'll also notice the term illegal alien is often emphasized in these sources. It's presented as legally precise, directly contrasting with what are seen as more sort of palliative terms like undocumented immigrant. The argument being that those alternative terms tend to obscure the legal reality of unlawful entry.
Okay, so if that perception of federal inaction is the foundational concern, where does that frustration really manifest most acutely? For many conservatives we studied, it seems to be in the rise of sanctuary cities and states. From this viewpoint, jurisdictions like, say, New York City are considered to be engaging in lawless acts, even akin to a nullification of federal law, or, in some stronger language, an actual insurrection. That's a really strong charge. And what's particularly striking, maybe, is that even Mayor Eric Adams in New York City, despite operating in a sanctuary city, he's openly expressed significant concerns, stating that the ongoing migrant crisis will destroy New York City. That's his quote, citing the immense financial strain.
Yeah, that statement from Mayor Adams about New York City's budget crisis, it powerfully underlines a central conservative concern, the economic and fiscal burdens. The very act of declaring oneself a sanctuary city, while maybe rooted in certain humanitarian ideals, is viewed through this lens as directly inviting significant financial strain on local taxpayers and public services.
And those burdens, when you start looking at the numbers presented in these sources, they become a primary driver of the conservative argument, especially for taxpayers. Can you maybe unpack what's meant by net fiscal drain in real terms? What does that actually look like according to these analyses?
Certainly. Yeah. A central argument you find in conservative circles is that those who enter the country illegally represent a net fiscal drain on public coffers. Basically, this means they're perceived to receive more in government services and benefits over their lifetime than they contribute in taxes. One study we looked at actually estimates the average lifetime fiscal drain for each illegal immigrant at approximately $68,390 in 2023 dollars. Now, this figure is largely attributed in the analysis to lower average education levels among this population, which often correlates with more modest earnings and consequently lower tax payments. So the argument boils down to their tax contributions don't come close to offsetting the costs they generate for public services.
Right. So breaking down some of those costs a bit further, our sources indicate that a majority, around 59% of households headed by illegal immigrants, use one or more major welfare programs, which amounts to, reportedly, roughly $42 billion annually. And it's not always, a direct path to benefits for the individual themselves. A key reason cited for this high usage is that over half of these households have at least one U.S.-born child. These children are citizens, right? So on their behalf, families can then receive benefits like free school meals or WIC benefits. And on top of that, some states directly offer things like Medicaid or SNAP under certain conditions. Plus, existing work authorizations like DACA, TPS, or even pending asylum applications can provide Social Security numbers and eligibility for things like the Earned Income Tax Credit.
Exactly. And beyond those welfare programs, the strain on core public services is also presented as significant. For instance, the education piece. Educating approximately 4 million children of illegal immigrants in public schools, that was estimated at $68.1 billion back in 2019. And often there are additional costs incurred for remedial help and language services. Then there's health care for uninsured individuals, frequently provided through emergency rooms, estimated at about $7 billion annually. And you see major cities and states really highlighting this, like New York City projecting $12 billion over 3 years, or Illinois reporting $4.59 billion in costs in 2022 alone. They're pointing to immense budget crises. And these crises, from the conservative perspective, could lead to potential cuts in essential services for all residents, things like sanitation, libraries, maybe even police departments.
Okay, so all of this combination of welfare use and strain on public services, it leads to what conservatives refer to as the pull factor. The argument basically is that this whole array of services and assistance being offered, everything from, say, shelter and meals right at the border, to federal funding for NGOs helping out, to hotel rooms and even one-way plane tickets in places like New York City, along with those prepaid debit card programs you sometimes hear about, that all this creates an incentive for more migrants to enter illegally. And this, they argue, places an unjust and, frankly, unsustainable burden on taxpayers. Taxpayers who might then face significant tax hikes or cuts to services they rely on.
Right. And stepping away from the purely fiscal concerns for a moment, a deeply significant conservative argument revolves around public safety and national security. It's a major theme. It's asserted in these sources that crimes committed by those who are here illegally have, quote, skyrocketed due to what are perceived as open border policies. And this encompasses claimed increases in really serious offenses: homicide, assault, drug trafficking, DUIs.
And the tragic case of Laken Riley comes up frequently in these discussions. A 22-year-old nursing student allegedly murdered by an individual who was in the country illegally. Someone who was reportedly released under catch-and-release policies, and then again by a sanctuary city. This is often cited as a heartbreaking, stark illustration of the potential consequences. Our sources also raise pretty dire concerns about broader national security threats, pointing to, for example, Mexican drug cartels exploiting the situation, or individuals on terrorist watch lists potentially crossing unimpeded, and directly linking border insecurity to the devastating fentanyl crisis, with drugs flowing north. And perhaps the most fundamental security concern expressed is just the perceived lack of vetting. The question of who are these individuals entering illegally? Do they have criminal backgrounds, ill intent, communicable diseases? The argument is without proper vetting, the nation is left vulnerable.
So, okay, if the perception is that the federal government is failing in these core duties, border enforcement, mitigating fiscal burdens, ensuring security, this raises the crucial question: what can the states do? And this is exactly where the concept of immigration federalism comes into play.
Exactly. This viewpoint argues that states possess significant inherent powers. Powers under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution to influence immigration and refugee policy within their own borders. And this is asserted to be true even outside the explicit federal powers over things like nationalization or controlling the international border itself. The idea is, essentially, states don't need explicit permission from Washington, D.C. to act. They just need to exercise the authority they believe they already possess.
That's the core of it, yes. States are strongly encouraged in these frameworks to take unilateral action to mitigate the costs and impacts of what they see as failing federal immigration policy on their own residents. And this can include a whole range of legislative actions, for example, denying driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, or decreasing or even eliminating state subsidies for those who might have temporary lawful status. Some states advocate for even more stringent policies, like really cracking down on employers using E-Verify. That's the system allowing businesses to check work eligibility electronically, and imposing serious sanctions on those who don't comply. This whole approach is sometimes referred to, kind of bluntly, as a self-deportation strategy. The aim being to incentivize undocumented residents to leave voluntarily by making it harder to live and work.
And states are also encouraged, in some of these proposals, to refuse the resettlement of individuals who've entered illegally, and even refugees sometimes. This approach advocates for potentially prosecuting them for state crimes like trespassing or identity theft, or even facilitating their deportation back to Mexico, or, as some sources phrase it, sending them to Democrat states that are perceived to covet them. We actually found an example of this dynamic where governors in 31 states expressed opposition to admitting Syrian refugees a while back, citing safety concerns after the Paris attacks. And while governors can't totally prohibit federal refugee settlement, they can impose certain requirements or simply refuse to cooperate with federal resettlement programs, making it difficult.
Right. And this push for state action even extends to challenging long-standing legal precedents. It's quite bold. While acknowledging the 1982 Supreme Court ruling in Plyler v. Doe, that's the one that denied states the ability to refuse public education to illegal immigrant children, some conservatives suggest states should actively challenge precedents like that now. The argument being that today's illegal immigration situation, things like tens of thousands of unaccompanied minors arriving, the escalating costs for school districts' work year, that these problems are far greater in scale and impact than they were back in 1982. So they argue it warrants a new legal look. And beyond just challenging laws, states could also explore creating their own guest worker programs, something maybe similar to Canada's provincial nominee program, which lets provinces select immigrants based on local labor needs. This would allow state employers to directly hire foreign workers with temporary visas, kind of letting the free market decide who comes. Ultimately, the conservative idea here is that a diversity of state-level policies could be really revealing, instructive even, and potentially demonstrate long-term solutions that maybe Congress could then adopt nationally.
Okay, now it's always important for us in these deep dives to remember that with any complex issue like this, there are always multiple perspectives, multiple interpretations of the data too. So while the sources we've explored present a strong and coherent conservative viewpoint, it's crucial to acknowledge that other research often offers different conclusions and nuances, which helps provide a broader picture.
That's a truly crucial point for getting a holistic understanding. Absolutely. For instance, while some arguments focus heavily on immigrants taking American jobs or driving down wages, other research often suggests that any displacement effect on native-born workers is generally small. In fact, some analyses propose that immigrants can actually expand employment opportunities by filling labor gaps, and might even increase wages and income for Americans overall through things like increased demand and innovation. Similarly, on the fiscal side, while that net fiscal drain is a huge concern for conservatives, other analyses suggest immigration can have a net zero or even positive impact on government budgets in the long run. They point out that a significant portion of immigrants, including those without legal status, do pay taxes, federal, state, local, especially consumption or property taxes. Some states that rely heavily on those tax streams might even see a net surplus from these contributions. And furthermore, many analyses highlight that immigrants often make large net contributions to programs like Medicare and Social Security, which can actually help extend the solvency of those vital programs.
Right. And on the topic of crime, too. While concerns about public safety are undeniably very real and deeply felt by many, some data indicates that immigrants, including those who are undocumented, are statistically less likely to be incarcerated for violent and property crimes compared to native-born Americans. We also see arguments that assimilation, while, often a messy and challenging process historically, is ultimately a successful one, quite comparable to past waves of immigration. Indicators like naturalization rates, English language proficiency. By some measures, these are actually stronger now among immigrant populations than they were, say, a century ago. And finally, you have perspectives arguing that national sovereignty isn't inherently diminished by allowing the free flow of nonviolent foreign nationals, pointing to periods in U.S. history with, near open borders, where national sovereignty was arguably maintained without significant compromise. So this deep dive has really shown us that the conservative case for immigration policy, as presented in these sources, centers intensely on the rule of law, the perceived fiscal burden, and national security concerns. And it strongly advocates for state-level action where federal efforts are seen as insufficient or failing. It's a perspective deeply rooted in the idea of states needing to defend their own citizens and resources.
So what does this all mean for you as you're listening and thinking about this? As you navigate the ongoing, often heated national debate, consider the profound implications of these proposed state-level actions. This really raises an important and maybe difficult question. In a country as diverse and interconnected as the United States, can a patchwork of distinct state-specific immigration policies truly provide a cohesive and effective long-term solution? Or might it, perhaps inadvertently, exacerbate existing challenges and even create entirely new ones? It's definitely something worth mulling over as this crucial debate continues to evolve.